and then knowing, okay, where are the gaps there? Where are the gaps in terms of how we want to be performing? Because we still want to be high performing. That's a key thing that people get confused. They think it's all about happiness and keeping people satisfied. And yes, that is a core component of well-being. But what we also want to do along the way is to get that nice harmony between performance and well-being. So
thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I am your host, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we have someone today on our podcast, very special. And the reason why is because we understand that the importance of mental health, right? I think there's been a lot of things that have been pushed in our way. And obviously we have to be very cognizant and aware of that. However, though, I wanted to have her on our podcast because just the emphasis of how to really run a successful organization, but also have a strong mental health capability in our business structure and really prioritizing that for our team members. Because if they're running on low empty gas, guess what? They're never going to be optimal and your business is never going to be optimal to the highest level. And so, ladies and gentlemen, she is the owner of Australasian Sustainable Wellness Academy, ASWA. They help individuals and organizations cultivate safe and healthy performance work cultures that enable people and organizations to adapt, deliver, grow, and thrive. Now, she has traveled to over 50 countries on wellness projects and research missions since 1994. Now, since she was a childhood, years in PNG to living and working in Thailand for 6 years and visiting various countries in Asia and beyond, she has had the incredible opportunity to collaborate with and contribute to strengthening an array of innovative, diverse, and award-winning wellness projects. My friend, Angela Derks. How are you doing today, Angela?
I'm doing great, thanks, Christian. What a beautiful introduction on this early morning here in Australia, so appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to diving into this. Now, of course, I don't want to talk much about like the importance of mental health, right? We get that. That makes perfect sense. However, though, now that we prioritize it, how do we prioritize it in our business, and how do we scale that in making sure that we have a healthy culture that prioritizes that?
Well, Christian, the first thing is to be aware that it actually exists and that there is this level of exhaustion. So we know that the rate of change in workplaces is changing dramatically, and around statistics and research, we know that the number one people risk, it's actually rating number third in terms of research, is exhaustion. So although we're aware that exhaustion can exacerbate the possibility of mental health conditions, we also aren't tracking it on an individual company level in terms of how it's actually affecting our employees. Now, there are different types of tests that we can do for our employees, yes, surveys, etc. But what we do know is that a third of organisations are confused about which department is looking after well-being. So mental health, it normally falls under the safety team, certainly here in Australia. But in terms of well-being, then is it under the safety team? Is it under the HR team? So what we know then is if a third of organisations don't know where it fits, then there isn't a specific strategy around it and who's actually driving it. So people are concerned about stepping on each other's toes. If we can at least clarify, okay, there is a need, we do need to be making this a priority, let's have a specific strategy for it and know who's leading it, then at least that gets the ball rolling and then the initiatives can start from there.
I love that because see, if you don't have a strategy and a way to deploy it, and obviously certain metrics that you're obviously measuring to make sure that we're all on the same path. So let me ask you this, let's dive into that a little bit, okay? And pull back the onion. What would be a good way to implement a strategy? Because again, you don't want to overwhelm your employees or your team with, okay, let's do all these things, right? And the reality is, let's do it strategically, but also get the most optimal results. So what does that look like on a strategic standpoint?
Well, it's starting with what are the key needs, and each organisation's different, each industry and sector is different, and just meeting people where they are to begin with, and then looking at what needs to be done. So it's not dramatically different from a business strategy. So it's looking at what are we trying to achieve? What are our core values? There's mine right behind us. So it's similar, but taking it through to the team level, and then knowing, okay, where are the gaps there? Where are the gaps in terms of how we want to be performing? Because we still want to be high performing. That's a key thing that people get confused. They think it's all about happiness and keeping people satisfied. And yes, that is a core component of well-being. But what we also want to do along the way is to get that nice harmony between performance and well-being, so that we aren't compromising our health and well-being in the process. So the key thing is looking at things like work design, how we're dealing with work when it comes in, our structures, our systems, our procedures, our leadership. Have we got those capabilities? If not, where are the gaps, and how do we fill those gaps, and do that in a structured way over a period of time that is both realistic and practical.
Well, let's kind of give an example of like a good kind of system to implement it and a bad one, because I think a lot of business owners that are probably listening, they're like, oh yeah, we have quarterly check-ins, we have like, every 6 months we check in, okay, wonderful, right? And these questions like, hey, how are you doing? 1 to 10, cool, wonderful, right? And I know that's probably not what you're thinking in regards to obviously a good cadence or check-in. So kind of explain like what is a good cadence and what is a bad one.
Well, starting with where is everybody now? Are we essentially on the brink of burnout, particularly across our leaders? So having some evaluation points of where are we sitting as a team, and being really honest with that, sitting with that, and not being concerned about, oh, maybe we've got this problem that's even bigger than what we thought. So having a monitoring strategy that you're actually got check-in points, yes, but what are those check-in points? What value have they actually got? And also including the team in the process. We find that most organizations tend to delegate someone who's already overworked. So that's an issue in itself. So you've got someone that might be, I'll just use as an example, and it may work in some organizations, but I'm just bringing up a recent example, that it might be the sales team. And it could be the sales team of an organization that has, and just using a recent example, as I've said, that has gone through a flood. So they're going through a whole lot of issues around rejigging everything to do with sales and production already. And then they delegate it to that same individual to also then be driving well-being. So what we'd say is we need to look at our resources and go, hang on, is there actually enough time to do that? Because there is no difference between driving well-being and driving the accounts department, or driving production, or driving manufacturing. So give it the value that it actually deserves. Give those people the capabilities. Again, it isn't something that everyone inherently knows. When I went to business school, we did not learn about well-being. We did not learn about what the fundamentals are. What are the principles of well-being? How do we actually recharge our body? We hear lots around it, but what are the fundamentals? What are the principles? There's 8 principles. It's nutrition, it's movement, it's breath. Most people think I can just breathe. I don't need to learn anything else, but there are some core elements around how to breathe to get the optimum oxygen so that the body can function its best through the nose, not the mouth. And here I'm going into detail, but the idea and what I'm trying to get across, Christian, is that there is a skill involved in that. And it isn't just knowing how to breathe, but how do you bring that into possibly a program, but into just the way we are working. So it's more of a cultural thing, which takes time. And most companies want a quick fix rather than looking at, let's put in and go step by step, rather than a fruit box and some smoothie bites and a 1 day of wellness. It's wellness every day. Otherwise, it's not wellness. It's not sustainable if you cannot be implementing it on a daily basis.
I love that approach because, see, I definitely, and I think you hit a chord with our audience, because a lot of them do want that very quick fix. Okay, hey, what's the result, right? It's almost like deploying a marketing strategy. Okay, hey, what's our return on investment? What does that look like? How do we pivot quickly? And the reality, just like you said, it is culturally the whole thing, and it has to adjust. So let's talk a little bit about that. So if we know that that's true, what are certain things that first of all, are maybe red flags that you are aware that, okay, hey, I don't have an infrastructure in place. Like maybe, hey, I'm seeing more complaints on the customer service side, or maybe I'm seeing more complaints, or maybe just a lot of my team members aren't able to produce or perform like they were. Like, what are some red flags that as a business owner is like, okay, hey, I gotta deal with this? And then secondly, like, what are certain steps in the right direction for our business owner?
All right, well, starting with things like turnover. So if we're going through high turnover, because it's not just the training of onboarding new people, it's also the additional workload for the others that are left after we've got people going out the door. So that additional workload then leads to exhaustion. There's also workers' compensation claims, so psychological safety. So workload stress is one of the highest. It's 4 times as costly than physical cases. So we start to see that coming up, and it might not be that they've actually gone to a claim. It might just be that there were incidences reported. So we asked to look at the figures. That's a starting point. You know, numbers tell a story, and the story generally needs to be asked a few more questions to actually get to the answer, because those numbers that we ask for, whether it's turnover, that's normally with the HR department, safety incidences, etc., are normally with another department. So sometimes all those numbers haven't actually been brought together for what we call the wellness story. How well are we? And then, of course, it's having consultation with the team and actually talking to them about what are they seeing, what are they feeling, are they able to express themselves if they're seeing that there is areas for improvement. We find when we go in as a consultant that they're very comfortable to talk to us about that. And then when we ask to look at, okay, so what is the strategy? Most organisations don't have a strategy, so they're generally not knowing where to start. And what we start with is, well, let's just have a look at where we need to start and where the greatest gaps are, and of course what is most important to the team, what is most important to the company, and can we come up with something that is going to clearly have a strategic impact on not only the bottom line, but for the people going through those processes, because there is going to be transformation in terms of their processes throughout everything that they do. So let's have a look at that, and getting it down to bite-sized pieces over a couple of months or possibly years, depending on the size of the organization.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what does that timeline look like? And I know it's just dependent upon obviously the size of the organization, but sometimes to have the right expectation for that business owner when you implement this kind of this strategy to help the foundation of your business, it may take months, it may take years. So with that being said, I would imagine definitely when implementing this strategy, there are certain tough decisions you have to make. Maybe sometimes you may have to make executive decisions to hire and fire individuals. What does that look like in the health of your business? Is that very viable, or is that something that maybe you could still ascertain those clients or those team members that maybe have had a tough situation mentally?
Well, it's looking at, okay, first of all, the viability of the business. If it's not sustainable, then action needs to be taken. That's going to affect everybody regardless. But being able to do that in a way that is still respectful to those individuals and that shows care and compassion to not only those that might be exiting, but also those that are remaining, because that can speak volumes to those staff that aren't being possibly let go, but at the end of the day, the team are there to produce, whether it's services or whether it's products. And if it's simply not viable, then the understanding as employees is that we do what's best for the organisation whilst also taking care of those humans that are part of that process. Because at the end of the day, humans aren't just there for a paycheck, they're there for a satisfaction and to be able to be achieving something as they go. So there is an element around how that is done to maintain mental health and having those conversations so that they aren't a shock for the individual. You don't want to just come in one day and you're part of the 100 people or so being let go, that there has been discussions around that and that everyone is aware that that could be I could be one of those, but that I'm going to be looked after and that it's done in a respectful way that still maintains dignity as one exits.
Well, see, let me ask you, because while you were talking, I was thinking about kind of like the Enneagram, or like these personality tests. And I was part of a company many years ago, and they had me take something like that. And what was interesting is that the software was able to provide not only your personality, but also your team members' personalities as well, and what
Yep.
their communication style was. And let me ask you, just on the well-being, not of just internally yourself, but also the well-being of the communication between teams, how important or how much emphasis do you put on those kind of personality tests, identify that, and to emphasize and say this is very valuable for the team, because now we all know how to play nice in the play box?
I think it provides a framework and a point of consideration, because there's all different types of type of test to allow us to gain insight into our team members. And I think as a leader, but also as a peer, just having that to consider, because otherwise we only know what we know, and we tend to know about ourselves. If we don't have insight into perhaps how others are perceiving us and how they might be perceiving certain situations, then we have a much narrower view. So they can provide some guidelines, but at the end of the day, every human being is still different, because they bring in all their experiences that help to shape that. So it's really just a guideline is how I tend to look at those, but it is helpful to have as a consideration factor, but not the only consideration factor.
So this is one thing when I was building my business and scale it, one of the things that I struggle with the most, and that I really put a lot of my time and energy, is I was always in the mindset of scale the unscalable, right? And a lot of business owners, right, when you get to X amount of revenue and so forth, you're not able to engage with every single one of employee every single week, right? You have to delegate it to your CMO and COO, and they have their own teams and systems. But my question is how do you, I guess, have that relationship, right? And I guess it's a culture, but how do you have those relationships and really have that custom plan, like you were saying, for each individual on your team, from the CEO to Billy Bob that just runs some thumbnail on YouTube, right? Because that person, just like you said, it's that they're going through certain things. Their mother might have passed away, they're whatever, right? And how do you build that where, hey, we want to keep you, but also have that expectation and making sure that your well-being here in the company is the best?
Well, it comes down to relationships, because there'll be someone leading those teams. It's not that they're all off individually. Of course, they've got each other, and they've got a supervisor, a manager, or a leader. So if everyone is aware and talking about the importance of mental health and well-being, then there's little checkpoints that let's say his name's Anthony and he's going through a divorce perhaps, and he doesn't have to go into detail about it, but certainly as his leader, then I would be aware, or that person would be trained, because one of the key things that we do is deliver qualifications in workplace wellbeing so that they can be managed. So the concept is that there is individuals in each department around wellbeing that is actually working with leaders to be able to come up with a way that's going to work for that organisation. So if you've got little checkpoints in there that you're having those conversations, yes, the CEO might be extremely busy. Don't expect him to be on top of everybody, but to have it's like a register, I suppose, and in some organisations they actually do that, because they need to do that in terms of their safety risks, because they might be dealing with some high impact and high risk situations. But to have a register such as 50% of my team currently have got personal issues that are impacting perhaps could impact mental clarity, and you have a look at that overall and go, geez, we're at 70% at the moment as a post-COVID, and we've got all these other factors. We've just had recent floods, put that on top. Then we need to be looking at perhaps restructuring some of the customer contracts that we've got on hand and see if we can maybe extend them out, or look at what are we doing work-wise that's also going to be mitigating the risk of us not delivering on the quality of work that we usually do, and also maintaining the mental health and well-being. So it's harmony around business and personal.
I love that. I love that approach. And like you said, at the end of the day, it's about relationships. It's building that relationships, and you have to build that culture around it. So my question to you then is, what are certain systems that help you kind of facilitate that relationship in the right manner? And like you said, you don't want to be treating a person like a metric, right? Like ad spend or something like that, right? Or a product like you were mentioning. But you do want to have some sort of measurement, so you're able to say, okay, where were we, where are we at, and where are we going, right? And so I guess, what are good, healthy measurements that would be able to say, okay, hey, you know what maybe questions, maybe Excel spreadsheets, maybe something that maybe I know quarterly check-ins. I've worked with some individuals that do that, but I'd love to kind of dive deep into that. Like, what are some good processes to help you facilitate that relationship at a deep level, and obviously really kind of get an idea, okay, where they're at, where they want to be, and where they want to go.
Well, the way that we look at it is that it's part of the daily conversation anyway. So it isn't so much, we do have the ASWA wellness tracker. It does actually track those 8 principles of wellness. So that can be done throughout the organization. So each individual, we know from the beginning, we normally do it at least halfway through if we're first implementing or doing a pilot program, for example. And of course, when our students are learning about wellness in a workplace setting, they are learning about culture, they are learning about team leadership, they are learning about ROI calculators and how that looks like, so that we can actually look at not so much just the people factor, but where we are leaking money due to mental health and well-being. So we start with that, the wellness tracker. So that actually looks at those 8 principles of wellness, and we can identify very quickly then the level of possible burnout. And it's essentially 80 questions. So it's quite a chunky, it takes about 15 minutes to complete. And what we do then is go, okay, all right, let's have a look at that with some of the numbers to go, all right, where are we going to focus well-being moving forward? And we do that at least 3 times a year. But then we also have the well-being program where they're actually having a one-to-one conversation, because most people actually don't know what their well-being is like. They might know that they might need to lose weight, but they might not know that their mindfulness is actually the lowest. There's been a lot of talk about resilience, but what about mindfulness, and where does that fit in when we're actually sitting in meetings and making real decisions? So sorry, Christian, my cat's just jumped on my lap and taken my mind talking about mindfulness. What was the question again?
No, you're fine. And I love what you're talking about. Let's kind of dive into the mindfulness, because see, what I find so interesting is, I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, if you think about all your top leaders, right? If you only get 10% of their capability, then your business can only grow, 2%. But what if you all of a sudden help them expand that to almost, now you're gathering 90%? And why are they only giving you 10%? A lot of it has to do with their household situations, what's going on, the life situations and so forth. And so if you ever study the top CEOs of large corporations, a lot of corporations actually do everything for that CEO. I mean, laundry, housekeeping, your vehicle, everything, right? And the reason why is because they know the value of that CEO, that COO, that CMO. And so what happens, not only do they pay them a lot, but they facilitate almost every aspect of their life automated. And the reason why is because now they know that they're getting almost 98% of that individual's attention and attention span and capability. And so I love to kind of talk a little bit about mindfulness, because when you get people that, okay, hey, let's creatively think about things, you're only getting sometimes only 10, 15, 20% of the true capacity. And I love to ask you, Angela, what have you seen in regards to maybe just like working with some of your clients that, okay, hey, you know what? They see that these red alerts, and they actually did something, and they started implementing the strategies that you're talking about. And then all of a sudden, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, to see those results into fruition. And I'm not just talking about revenue, but I'm just talking about maybe team happiness, maybe team growth, whatever those metrics look like.
All right, so the key metrics that we tend to see organisations focusing on are turnover, because it is so costly. So how do we keep individuals for longer, and particularly key personnel. So those at the, not just always at the top level, but it could even be teachers in a school, for example. If you've got 20% turnover, then at any one day, you've got other people coming in and taking their place. And so some of the key things that we've seen is around engaging. You hear about engagement. A lot of organizations, if we can engage them more into what they're doing, because they seem to be disengaged. So they are taking all their sick days that they have available for them, which is leading to this turnover, for example. So that's a fundamental issue that we see commonly. So what is it about them being disengaged? Is it because they don't see that there's any pathway for them as a teacher? Where do they go next? What is the next level? So we need to be engaging them with their purpose, with their values and their fundamentals, because it isn't just about them coming to work for their paycheck. It's about what are their goals and how do they want to live their best life, and actually engaging them in that process and making the time to do that. So making it part of their, not just their recruitment and their training, but ongoing. So yes, there's coaching involved and mentoring involved with them. So the leaders need to be trained in those components so that they can do that effectively. But also then, how is that being tracked and followed up? Because a lot of the times we see that is done as a one-off, but then it starts to lose momentum. So how are we going to actually engage them in that process so they can actually see, not only do I provide value on a daily basis to my current role, but I can see that I'm going to be able to progress. And once they are engaged in that process, so they can see that the what's in it for me is still important for individuals. It's not just about our output for that organisation, but then we start to see that there's reduced sick days, for example, and then people are at work, but not only at work and not engaged, as you said, they're there for only 10% of their brain possibly is there, because there's a presenteeism component. So what we want is, yes, they're there, but they're there with full mind, body, and bringing their full capacity. So it's about energy management as well. So when we're talking about people being able to bring themselves, we want them to bring their full energy. And how do we don't normally talk about the energy wellness system. We just talk about time management and all the systems and processes, but that individual comes in with a certain capacity and capability. How do we build that so that then they can perform at their optimum? And so that tends to be an area that we focus on when we're talking about well-being. So taking turnover, for example, from 20% down to 15%, let's say each person that's walking out the door is costing us 10,000. Well, if we've got 10,000 and we've got 10 people, that's 100,000 each year. If we can reduce that by 2 or 3 for a small business, that could make a difference to them being able to come up with a wellbeing program, for example. It could be just enough to kickstart some type of measurement, for example.
And what I find so interesting in what you're saying here as well is because, see, I know like business owners themselves, it's like, okay, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? The concept. And the sad thing is probably a lot of business owners are like, okay, this is cool, wonderful, but my team's doing fantastic. I don't need this right now. Mm-hmm. And the reality though is, let me ask you, just from a professional, right? Because you have probably gone in and consulted with companies that are like, oh my gosh, we're going 1,000 miles miles per hour in the wrong direction, and we got to turn this ship around, and it takes a lot of energy to do so. But obviously, as business owners, we understand we want to be proactive, not just reactive. And so let's talk about that. And obviously, okay, if someone's walking through their mind saying, I don't need this, my team is fantastic, maybe at what point should they, kind of start looking at that, or maybe even putting the foundation in, because the massive growth that will happen in the future for their own business, organization, and their team, and so forth.
Well, prevention, look, I was trained as a naturopath at the beginning of my career, so it is all about prevention rather than waiting until the wheels fall off the car or that the brake, the brake linings are already completely gone. My dad was a mechanic, so it's not about the exterior of the car and how nice the paint it is. It's about, you've got essentially, there's only four small parts of a wheel. Each tire that's on the ground is actually what's making the difference. And then you've got the engine, and then you've got the brakes. So you need to be looking at all those aspects to be able to go, okay, we need to keep on top of that. And there's maintenance. So we don't wait until the car is nearly burnt out before we get it to a service. We look at how do we keep topping that up so that it keeps running effectively, most optimally. We do it for our cars, we do it for our phones, we do it for our houses, but we aren't inherently trained to do it for our bodies. And our bodies and our minds run on some fundamentals, whether you look at Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, all the different modalities around the world, which is what I started with my career before I got into workplace wellbeing. It was about the human wellbeing and working in health retreats around how people would come there generally when they're exhausted, when they're at the point of burnout, and then needing to recharge. So the concept is, how do we stop it before we get to that? Because there is a business impact on that. So after working with those individuals, then that's when I started being asked to work in a much larger scale to be able to take that through, so that then there is that impact on the business before it gets to critical point, before we have to turn the ship around. And yes, sometimes need to do that, but let it go maybe off course a bit, but then bring it back here. And it's having those checkpoints of, we need to just turn that a bit. So whether it's, in accounting department, same thing, okay, all right, we're a bit off with cash flow. We thought we'd be here and we're not. We thought we'd be having this much revenue and we're not. All right, so we need to look at sales. We need to look at marketing. Same thing. We're not going to have enough reserves in the tank if we don't know where are we, where are our checkpoints. So having those goalposts is essential for teams. And if they're not talking about it, if it's not part of the everyday culture, then you're going to miss those, and you're going to miss it until someone suddenly can't come to work one day, and and there could be a claim, but more importantly, the impact on that individual's health makes people start thinking about their health. Is this something that I want to compromise simply for my paycheck, for example? And being able to have that culture, yes, that takes time, but it also has a lot of systems and processes along the way. And that's why the course is 12 months, because it isn't just a 1 and 2 day course is a great introduction, but we knew that we needed to be looking at organizations holistically to be able to do that. And that's why I started developing the course, so that people are trained how to do this across a framework that is aligned with international standards, particularly ISO 45003, which is mental health and wellbeing for workplaces on an international standard. Because if you're not looking at strategy, systems, procedures, and particularly doing that regularly, daily basis, then you actually don't know what's happening. You're just guessing, really.
Wow, such incredible amount of value and insight on that. Because see, just like you were saying, I think so many times business owners, we just look at on dollars and cents, right? And we don't look at, okay, people as, okay, they're assets, and then as well as how do we get the return, right? And I never would like to say return on investment from people, but it's a concept of sometimes business owners, you have to position yourself and think like that, because then you value them at a higher level and say, okay, wow, systems are something stupid, but people are very, very valuable. Obviously, how do you optimize that to the highest level? Well, it's just what Angela's talking about, which is beautiful. Now, you did say something earlier in our podcast, and I want to bring this up now because it is a paradigm shift. A lot of business owners, they always thinking about, okay, well, it's all about happiness. It's all about joy. It's all about all these things, right? That's why I don't really care about it. People just need to get over themselves and just go to work, right? And get the job done. And sometimes maybe even I've talked to some business owners and like, oh, today's culture is just little snowflakes and pansies, right? But the thing is and lets you go ahead and just kind of speak on that for me. For those that are thinking, this culture snowflakes and pansies, and who cares about all that shenanigans? Just go to work and get the job done, because that's what my dad did. That's what his dad did, and all that stuff, right? Whatever.
Mm. Well, what I'll say is that that's how I was trained. So I grew up in a family business, a transport business in Papua New Guinea, and it was 24/7 business, and it was all about getting the job done in some very interesting conditions, to say the least. But wellbeing was, in fact, you were considered weak to even discuss anything mentally or health. It was always about the output and the outcome, and how much you did in terms of productivity. So it wasn't until I was actually working with teams myself, so started in my early 20s, when, to be honest, business and the bottom line and figuring out how to do that part wasn't a challenge, because it was in my blood and nature from working in a business. What I struggled with was the people component, and the understanding what they needed. And because I came from a different language as well, I listened and observed more, and I started to see that really my results was actually based around people and how I was dealing with the people to get the results. And I didn't explain it. I have to say, at that time, I wouldn't have been able to explain it the way I did now. And we're also validated by the output, not so much the process that leads to that. And so it wasn't until after, going to business school and studying commerce and a whole lot of things, which again, nothing to do with wellbeing and people, it's all about the numbers, but then starting to study a bit around psychology and understanding how the numbers are actually working through the people. And what I would say is that wellbeing is actually about performance and efficiency and sustainability, particularly for profitable businesses to remain so. And to do that, you need to have your if you've got products that you're using, you need to make sure that they're at quality and optimum. People, we need to keep them at their optimum performance. Wellness is not just an output, it's an input. So for them to perform at their best, they need to have optimum well-being. What does that look like? What does that mean? What does that mean for their team? Because each team can be different words. Well-being might not be the word, might never use that word for a actual strategy. That can be a strategy. We are not even going to use that word regularly around here, but at the end of the day, yes, it is well-being, because we need them to perform optimally. Well-being and health are part and parcel of that process. If we are going to continue to, completely be leaders in terms of outperforming our competition, well, how are you going to do that? People are a way that you can do that. You can have them give their discretionary effort if they feel that they are valued. And well-being is a way to value people, because not only are you going to bring the best to work today, but you're going to take it home at the end of that day to your partner, to your kids, to have that energy to perform as a inspiring and fun partner and mother or father, as an uncle or auntie, etc. That's what people want at the end of the day. They don't want to be going home with the empty tank. They want to do great work and also perform well in their personal life, or their sports teams when they play soccer or gridiron or whatever it might be. Yeah,
I love it because I was just thinking about an example. It's like, imagine two basketball players, right? One, everything else is equal, right? Their skill, their capability, their whatever, their upbringing, whatever. But the only thing that's different is, okay, one's girlfriend just broke up with him right before the game, right? Who's going to win one-on-one? Well, it's the person that, obviously is mentally, just like you said, and that's just a very simple, basic level. But my point is obviously seeing everything else is equal, but just because that mental health, that mental capability, all of us in that person has almost like a 70% decrease of losing, right? And so I think that's really awesome. And so, Angela, I just love what you got going on. I appreciate you just being on our podcast and sharing your, expertise and your data, and of course, just your experience. Now, where can our audience reach out to you to be proactive, right? To be proactive for their business and for their structure and implementing this?
Well, we're at aswa.net.au. And from there, we have various courses and consulting services so that we can actually enable individuals and organisations to be able to adapt, grow, and continue to thrive.
I love it. And guys, those links will be in the description below. Make sure you stop right now and literally click on that and make sure you consume some of her stuff right there. I was actually looking at it, quite a bit of resources, just tons about all these micro situations, just a remarkable amount of resourcefulness there on your website.
Hey, stop. This is Christian D. Evans, host of Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. And I just want to say personally, thank you for listening to our podcast. And, if you love what you're hearing right now, please, like this, share this, and show some love to our guest and write a review and, share this with your friend, your family, someone that truly needs it, because at the end of the day, you can make an impact in that person's life by sharing their story with that individual. And again, if you're a new guest, welcome to our community. We're so excited. We're so just honored. And secondly, if you're a returning guest, hey, we appreciate the love. Thank you. Share this with your friend and family. And guys, remember, be uncommon if you can.